so much in God's presence, and his presence has just been so powerful over the life of our church. And we say that as as a glory to him. I discovered early last week that just out of ministry from last week, our Spanish language service that's happening right now in an adjacent room, and our student ministry, and in this place and other ministries, we had over 40 salvation responses in a single weekend. That's like amazing. And humans can't program that or make that happen. It's just God's just doing something special in these days. And I just want us to know it and feel it and look around for it because it's real. We're in a series we've just started. I started last time. This series is birthed. It's birthed out of the Spirit of God just pressing in on my heart about something in me, about where I pretend too much, about just living a truthful and honest life, about me and about what's going on inside of me. It's about where my first love resides. And so here's the truth about me, and it's a truth about you too. My life, your life, is a bundle of competing loves. If you want to know your nature, if you want to know the core of you, you are a bundle of competing loves. You love some people. You love some things you enjoy doing. You love an ambition or a dream. And you love you. You might not like yourself so much, but I promise you, you love you. You love what you want for you right now. And the reality is that none of those loves are good enough. None of those loves will fill you. None of those loves will quench your thirst. In fact, they all will fall really short. And some of them will shatter your heart. All of them, every single one of them. There is only one love that can fill you, that can transform you into who you were created to be. There is only one love that can never fail you, and that is what is at the core of what it means to be a Christian, and it is the love that Christ pours out on your life. When Jesus, listen, for you, when Jesus becomes your first love. So we started last time, and we did in the introduction what all introductions should do, just answer the first question. And the first question is, what is it? What is first love? And so we looked in Revelation 2, there where Jesus dictates a personal letter, a personal message to the church at Ephesus. And he has John write that in your church, there's so much that's right. There's so much good that's in your church culture and in your character. But then he says so tenderly, he says, but I kind of hold something against you. And that is that you have, listen to this, you have left your first love. And so we dug into that. And what does it mean? So just grammatically, literally grammatically, if you look at that word, that compound word, first love, it means one of two things. It means this or this. It means the first thing you loved. That's what first love means. Or it is the way you loved at first. Or it is a mingling of both. And I think it's a mingling of both. When Christ is your first love, He is the first, the primary thing you love. If He is your first love, you love Him. You love Him like He's the first thing in your life. And there is this incredible life that flows out of that. There is the power of it and the wonder that you experience and the depth of knowing that you yourself are first loved by Him, and then you respond. You respond in love to him, and the devotion that it produces, and just simply how it takes over your whole identity. That's what first love is, when Christ becomes your first love. And this is Jesus himself calling us into it. That's what Revelation 2 is, Jesus calling us into first love, into making him our first love. The one you love most of all, first of all, the one that you love absolutely and completely with your whole life. And so there's the first message and there's the first question. But then what comes next? What's next? Here's what's next. It's the whole message. And that is this: how do I find that? Yeah, what is it now, this message? How do I find that? How do I find first love? How do I develop first love for Jesus in my life? How do I even do that? I want to show you. And I want to paint a picture for you of it. And I just want you to watch it sort of unfold in front of you. And I think if you can see it, you can experience it. So in your own mind, just start sketching, start painting a portrait of this while I walk through it. So we're going to walk into a moment of Jesus' earthly life. It's in Luke 7, and out of the 4 biographies, this incident in Luke 7, it's only recorded in Luke. The other biographies don't record it. It's unique to him. And so it turns out this Luke 7 passage, we as a church, we're kind of developing a relationship with this passage. So I preached on an aspect of this 12 years ago out of Luke 7. And then it lay dormant until 2020, and I went there in order to just express what mercy and how mercy makes a difference in our life. And then just last year, I came out of it again about the depth of love that we can experience. And here we are, 2023, we're there again. It's like we're developing a relationship with this incident. It has like endless insight for our lives. So it's Luke 7. It starts in verse 36. It goes all the way through 50. And because we've been in it so much before, I'm not going to go verse by verse, concept by concept. I want you to see the incident. Just see it. Let me describe it. Just see it, and then let's draw the first love principle out of it. So here it is, like a summary. Jesus is invited to a Pharisee's home. The Pharisee's name is Simon. And so that means Simon is elite and religious. But at this dinner party, this dinner that he invites him to, he doesn't really treat Jesus with the kind of hospitality that shows him that he's welcomed, that he's accepted by Simon. Simon doesn't have a servant wash Jesus' feet when he enters at the front door. It's common, it's needed, but he doesn't do it. Simon doesn't, when he comes in, put his hand on his shoulder and kiss him on the cheek. Their sign of warm hospitality that you are my friend and I want to be your friend. He doesn't do that. Simon doesn't even do the cheapest thing, and that is anoint or give him olive oil to pour on his head just to soothe what the sun does in that climate. It was a common thing. It was a common hospitality ritual that he didn't do. And so these are obvious and deliberate disrespects. And so these dinners were like public events. It's not that the public was invited. Only special guests, only really privileged people were invited to these dinners. But these wealthy people, they ate in their courtyards. And so it's this outdoor enclosure. And so there would be courses of food, and they were public in that all of the people around would come, and they would lean on the little brick enclosure and listen in to the whole dinner, see the food and listen in, and basically find out what's going on in their community. And so it was an event to come and watch. And so during that dinner, a woman quietly moves through the crowd and crosses, I don't know, some kind of invisible barrier line, and goes into the dinner party and slips in behind Jesus. He's reclining at this low-slung table. He's leaning on his left arm. He's eating with his right hand, and she slips in behind him to where his feet are, and she just crumples there and begins to sob and wash his feet with her tears. Simon is indignant about it. The text says it's obvious that she's a sinner. The specific word means a sexually immoral person, meaning she was probably a prostitute. And Simon is indignant. He's not indignant about all the right things. He's indignant that Jesus is not stopping her from doing it. That's what he's offended by, that he's not stopping her from doing what she's doing. But Jesus doesn't stop it. He just lets it go on. And so here is Simon. The text says Simon is thinking these things. This man can't be a prophet. I mean, if he were a prophet, he'd know what kind of woman this is, and he wouldn't let her touch her. And he's just thinking all of that. And so Jesus, proving that he is the Son of God, proving that he is a prophet, he tells Simon a story that reads Simon's mind. And so he says, Simon, verse 40, I have something to say to you. And Simon replied, say it, teacher. And Jesus tells this short, little, compact teaching story. 2 verses. So Jesus says, a moneylender had 2 debtors. One owed 500 denarii. The other owed 50. When they were unable to repay, he graciously forgave them both. Which one of them loved him more? And Simon answered, verse 43, and you can just see the reluctance to answer here. I suppose the one who he forgave more. And he said to him, you have judged correctly, you self-righteous Pharisee. And verse 44, then turning toward the woman, here's Jesus talking to Simon, but he turns to the woman because he wants to make this clear connection. He turns to the woman and he says, do you see this woman? One of our previous messages was completely that statement. Simon, do you see this woman? And the answer is no, he doesn't see her. I entered your house and you gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but since the time she came in, she's not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with this perfume, this flavorful, this aromatic ointment perfume, very expensive, that she's poured on him. For this reason, I say to you, her sins, which are many, he sees her clearly, her sins, which are many, have been forgiven. For she loved much, but he who is forgiven little loves little. And there's the principle. There's the operating principle of first love. We've just seen it. There's the answer. How could she love him so much? How could she express it so radically and beautifully and meaningfully and boldly? How could she do it? It's because first love operates from a principle. Here's the idea of the message. First love operates out of this principle. Forgiven much, loves much. Forgiven little, loves little. But much deeper, out of that principle, we're going to discover how we experience first love for Jesus. When you can see how little you deserve His love, when you can see how sacrificial His love for you is, when you can feel how full of grace and mercy His love for you is, when you can feel how unworthy you are of it, and yet how much you are worth to Him, how radically it transforms you from the inside out, you will be flooded with first love. But I want to say it in three distinct ways. I want to say it in three simpler ways. How does Christ become your first love? In three ways. Number one, the way the woman experienced it. Number one, first, you are drawn into it. I got to tell you that you will not experience first love for Christ until you're drawn into it. But how? How did she get that love for Him? Well, you got to do a little detective work for me here, because when Jesus refers to her at the end of the parable, He says about her that her sins had been forgiven. I mean, grammatically, He's saying that something before this moment, something happened to her where her sins had been forgiven her by God. And so logically, she would have had to have had an encounter with Christ either earlier that day or maybe the day before. And so, how did that happen? Where did that happen? Can we find that? Luke doesn't tell us, but what we get from Luke, just before this incident, what we get from Luke is that some of John the Baptizer's disciples came to Jesus and they asked, are you the expected one, or should we look for somebody else? So do the work. Go look in the other biographies. And you'll find in Matthew 11, John's disciples coming to him and saying, are you the expected one, or should we look for someone else? And so Jesus answers all of that, and then immediately following that, He stands up before a crowd and He says, Matthew 11, verse 28, come to me, every one of you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, my burden is light. And look, I believe she was drawn in to first love. I think she was drawn into Him by His invitation to her. Come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I'll give you rest. Nobody had ever cared for the total fatigue and weariness in her life. Nobody had ever cared for the overwhelming burden, the load of care that was crushing her heart. And all of that brought on because of her circumstances, because of what was going on in her life. And maybe unfair circumstances. Her husband may have died or just abandoned her. And that left a woman in first century Judea in a precarious position. There were no jobs for women in the ancient world, in ancient Judea, no social safety nets to catch her. And so when it came for her, when the choice came from either starving and feeding her children or to sell her body, she did what she had to do to simply survive. But it was like living in hell. Abused, shunned, outcast, full of shame and hopelessness and isolation. But this man said, come to me and I'll give you rest. That word for rest there means a rest that restores, a rest that replenishes, a rest that brings back life. It's restoration. And I wonder if there's anyone in this place who's exhausted by what life has done to you, or exhausted by maybe some choices you made, mistakes or bad choices you made long ago, but just the echo of those just continues to exhaust you to this day, or exhausted by the harm maybe done to you in the past, but unexplainably you feel the shame for it. She was drawn into first love because no one had ever said to her, I see your weariness, I see your broken heart, and I can give you rest. There was such a reality in it. Look, it's God in flesh, Jesus. There was such reality in what he said. There was an authority and a reality. There was the presence of God's Spirit all around her. She simply knew it was true. She knew it was true. And the Spirit of God spoke into her heart, and she turned to Christ for him to be the Lord, the leader of her life from that moment on. And I believe it is in that moment that her sins were forgiven and first love was produced in her. She was drawn to it, but she was not just drawn to it, but secondly, she was graced by it. She was graced by it. And so will you be too. That's found in verse 42, the core of the teaching story that Jesus teaches. When they were unable to repay, he graciously forgave them both. Here's the key detail that makes you understand the parable. This is the key detail. In fact, Jesus tells it in a way that if you're thinking in a certain way, you miss the detail. But if you're thinking in another way, you'll grasp it and see it and understand it, watch it. So in the parable, there's a big debt guy, 500 denarii, 500 days of wages in a poverty society where you needed today's coins in order to feed your family tonight. 500 denarii, a year and a half of wages. And then there was a little debt guy, 50 denarii, about a month and a half of wages. Now that throws you off if you can't see something incredibly important. And here's the incredibly important thing, verse 42. And when they were unable to pay. Let me say it again. When both of them were unable to repay. There were some listening to Jesus, and they have a level of self-righteousness that all they heard is there are some 500 denarii. There's some big debt people out there. And they're never gonna be able to repay. But I've lived a respectable life, and I've been pretty good, and I think my debt is little. And without saying it out loud, I think I can repay it. And that's where you miss it. And that's where you will never experience. You will never experience what this woman experienced. And so you'll miss the whole point. You'll miss the whole point. That neither could pay it back. Do you get it? It's a debt that no one, it doesn't matter if you have sinned your fill for your entire life or you sinned a little, a few years ago. The debt is too great. It can't be paid back. What you owe God, you can't pay back. That is the core of it all. The point is that it doesn't matter how much you owe if you can't pay it back. In fact, I'm going to pound this. Let me just... let me illustrate it. It's sort of like if a spider bites you on the back of the leg and you die and they lay you out. Or if a lion mauls your face and you die and they lay you out. In one case, you're pretty dead. In the other case, you were ugly dead. But it doesn't matter, you're still dead. It doesn't matter. We are spiritually dead before the Lord, and we can't repay even the little debt. And so what happens? Verse 42, what happens? He became, for this woman, Jesus became her first love because Jesus graciously forgave her. Do you see that there in the text? Charizomai means full of grace. The word in the text. She owed too much and she could see that she owed too much. The only way out is for the forgiver to give mercy and favor and grace totally at his cost, his sacrifice. You deserve none of it. Even though you can't deserve or pay it back, if you think your debt to him is little, it'll be hard for you to fall on his grace. That's what he's telling Simon there. It's easy for her to see that her debt is unpayable. It's hard for you, Simon, to see that so is yours. But it's deeper. If you can see your debt to him for what it is, too big for you to ever pay back, a response pours out of you. And that response is such phenomenal gratitude that it will produce first love in you. If you can't experience his love for you as grace and favor and mercy, I'm going to say it again. If you can't experience his love for you as grace and favor and mercy, then you'll never know what it is to feel love at its deepest level. There's no love deeper than forgiveness love, redeeming love, releasing love. But it's deeper. When you experience the love of forgiveness, when you come to realize, I know that he sees me as broken as I am, but sees me as worth redeeming. That's when first love will be produced in you. Her religion said she should be stoned to death. Her culture said she should be treated with contempt and shunned and rejected. And Jesus said, come to me, because I know you're broken and weary and heavy burdened, and you're worth my grace and my favor and my forgiveness, and I offer it to you. And that made her love for him pour out of her heart. First love was produced in her. Now I want to give you the last, and the last is this. So you're not just drawn to it, you're graced by it, but then thirdly, you're transformed in it. You're transformed in it. That's happening there in Jesus' conversation with, or what he has to say to Simon in verses 44 through 46, where he's talking about this woman to Simon, what she did as opposed to what he did. And so what's the evidence that she had been transformed? What's the evidence? I want to show it to you. Look at how moved she was when she came upon the dinner party. Look at how moved she was. She knew Jesus would be there. The story tells us that. She brought an alabaster vial of perfume from home. I mean, that tells us she was planning on anointing Jesus in some way, just to show his worth to her. So we know she was going to do that. But then something happened, and she was just moved, and her plan went off its rails. She watches how Jesus is being so mistreated by Simon the Pharisee. And she's overwhelmed by it. Have you ever seen the 7-year-old bully pick on your 6-year-old son? Yeah. You, as a 35-year-old man, want to go beat up a 7-year-old. Because you love that little boy or that little girl so much. She got so overwhelmed with how badly, the one she loved the most, she got so overwhelmed with how badly he was being treated. And she watched Simon, that he refused to kiss him in the greeting. She saw him put no basin of water out for his feet to be washed. She saw him not even take the cheap olive oil and give it to him to anoint his head. And so he's being dishonored, and she couldn't stand that. She was moved by it so deeply, she couldn't help it. She burst into the dinner party. She goes to Jesus. She drops on her knees, and her eyes flood tears on his feet, and she begins to wash his feet with her tears and kiss his feet in adoration. And she breaks the bottle of expensive perfume and pours it all out on him. Look at what she did. She didn't go in. I am so offended by you, Simon, and gives him a piece of her mind. She's silent. She never says a word. She's so moved that she goes and offers Jesus all of the hospitality that Simon refused to do it. It's how you treat someone you love deeply when they're being dishonored. Here's what you can know for sure. That woman possessed a transformed heart. No one loves Jesus as their first love unless the Spirit of God enters your heart and places the life of Christ in you and brings you to life spiritually. You must be reborn to it. Reborn to it. Last word. Maybe you've heard that the finest violins ever created, right, by Stradivari. The Stradivarius violins are so impeccably crafted. He and his family did it, made them in the late 17th century, but after he died, they became priceless because musicians will tell you that there is a beauty and a resonance that come out of them like no other violin. The beauty just takes their breath away. In fact, just a few years ago, one sold for over $15 million. And for a long time, nobody could figure out why, what made them have such beautiful resonance. But then some scientists figured it out. Stradivari was poor. So he wasn't like the rich violin makers who could buy the most expensive exotic woods to make his violins. In fact, he was so poor that he had to get his wood from the harbors near his home. Out of the black muck and garbage and pollution, he would pull those waterlogged logs out and wash them off and then cut them down and craft them into these beautiful instruments. But scientifically, nobody knew what was going on until these scientists figured out that pulling them out of those polluted harbors, when that wood was there waterlogged, microbes would seep into that wood, and those microbes would move all through the wood, and they would eat the center of every cell of the wood. They would eat out the center. And so, when crafted into a violin on a cellular level, every single cell of that violin was a resonant sound chamber. And it creates such beauty and awe. And I've got to tell you, it's been some years since I read that. But when I read it again, I mean, I'm not a crybaby, but I got to tell you, when I read that again just a couple of weeks ago, I could feel my eyes getting wet. Because that is exactly what Jesus has done for me. He's pulled me out of the sludge of my own fallenness, my emptiness, my hollowness, my sin. A lot of my sin had eaten me hollow and empty on the inside. But Christ, by his offer of love and forgiveness and grace and mercy, pulled me out of the sludge of my own sin and cleaned me off and remade me. And that's what he's done in you too, if you've asked Christ into your life. And it's knowing that and feeling that and embracing that that will stir in you the love you need for him to be first love. I'm going to ask us to bow together. We're going to be here a moment or two. But this needs to be your moment. Eber is going to come out and sing over you for a moment and then invite you to sing with him. But I want to pray with you first. I want to pray with you first if you've never placed your faith in Christ before. Maybe you've got a church experience. Maybe you've been showing up in church a long time. Maybe you went through something that someone told you, if you know this, then you know Christ. But you know, nothing has been converted. Nothing has been reborn in you. And I want to invite you to be reborn. And that happens when you honestly, truthfully encounter Christ and you say to him, I can't. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I'm a big debt guy or a little debt guy. I can't repay. I can't pay it. And I desperately, you're the only one who can forgive me and cleanse me and pull me out of the sludge of my past or what goes on in my heart. And I need to be reborn, converted, not just believe right stuff about you, but transformed. If you'll pray that to him right now in trust, something like, dear Father, thank you for your son, Jesus, that you sent to this earth to die for me in my place to pay my debt. And I know I don't have any hope outside of him, but I want him. I want his forgiveness and his cleansing and his life in me. And so I turn to you. I turn away from my life that's separated from you, and I turn to you, and I ask you to come in and make me brand new on the inside. I commit my life to you. You praying that or something like that, I can tell you that the Spirit of God is transforming you. You're being reborn. There are a lot of Christ followers in this room, a lot of people who name Christ, but you know that Christ is calling you. He's calling you. He's calling you back. Make me your first love.
Hey everyone, my name is Garrett Sims and I'm the Student Ministry Director here at Bear Creek. Hey, I just want to thank you so much for joining our broadcast today. Listen, this is so important. If you've never placed your faith in Christ or you're not sure that you have, I want to invite you to take this incredibly important step today. If you want to know how, do this. Click on the link bearcreek.church/hope or text the word BC Hope to 84576. And in about 2 minutes, our pastor, David Welch, will walk you through how to place your faith in Christ as the leader of your life. Honestly, this could be the most important 2 minutes of your life. Listen, lastly, let me invite you to join us any Sunday in any of our 4 Sunday morning worship services. Check out our website, bearcreek.church, to find out more about our times and locations. Thanks again for joining our broadcast today.